And I have a contact who, for a long time, performed satanic ceremonies in which ritual human sacrifice took place of children and of adults. And one of the key places, which I've talked about in my books, is a place known as the Castle of Darkness in Belgium. In the late 80s, she says that at a ritual sacrifice that she performed was the Queen of England, which she's done sacrifices for many times, the Queen Mother, Tony Blair, who was then just a lower-ranked politician, and Mohammed al-Fayed, father of Dodi. And yet in the public arena we get this royal family on one side and Dodi Fayed's father, Mohammed al-Fayed, on the other, when in fact they lock into the same controlling force. And he had control of her movements on the crucial day. There's the ISIS symbol of ancient Egypt, very close to that headgear that he posed with for a British newspaper. Now again, if you're going to kind of follow the symbolism and the background to Diana's assassination, you have to go back into the ancient world. You can pick one of these one of the pure key reptile human bloodlines up in Troy, ancient Troy, which is what we now call Turkey. You can follow this bloodline through the Caucasus Mountains and into Europe and into what we call France. In fact, France is named after these people. They called themselves the Sicambrian Franks. And they had a royal offshoot, and eventually became known by this royal offshoot, called the Merovingians. The Merovingians set up the city we call Paris. You're looking at a part of the modern Paris, which was the place that they established the original Paris. And they named the city after one of the people involved in the Trojan Wars, a guy called Prince Paris. And there's Notre Dame, Our Lady, Diana, Semiramis, Isis Cathedral. And this was where Paris kind of came out of with the Merovingians many, many centuries ago. Now, these Merovingians, Franks, Sicambrian Franks, worshipped the goddess Diana, who was one of the great goddesses of the ancient world. And they built underground chambers just outside the original Paris to do their sacrifices and ceremonies to the goddess Diana. Of course, as Paris has got bigger and bigger, the area of that sacrifice area for the goddess Diana is now modern Paris. And it's still an underground chamber. That point is called the Pont d'Alma Tunnel, where Diana died in 1997. And Diana is actually blood related to the Merovingian line. This is the Ritz Hotel, owned by Mohammed al-Fayed, and all around the square, it's called the Vendome, you see at first floor level depictions in gold of that symbol I talked about a long time ago, the circle, the cross, and the sun on the center. And it comes from one of the French kings, one of the Louis, who was known as the Sun King, who built the Palace of Versailles. And in the back of the Palace of Versailles, in the grounds, is a depiction of the goddess Diana, which this aristocratic bloodline network very much focus on as one of their deities. Someone said, this is the Kennedy assassination here, something very true. When you're trying to understand who was behind an assassination, look at who had the power to remove the security at the crucial time. Because he said assassinations don't just happen, they are allowed to happen. And when you look at the footage taken on a camera, a video camera, by a member of the public when Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister, was assassinated, it's extraordinary. You have the line of soldiers lined up to protect Rabin as he came to his car, and in among them is the guy who killed him. As Rabin appears on this video, extraordinary sight, the soldiers just walk backwards, leaving the assassin on his own. Rabin walks past him, thank you very much, good night. And it's the same with the Kennedy assassination and so many others. This is the point where Kennedy was hit. This is Kennedy's car at the front. There's nobody on it. And yet you look at the car behind, which doesn't carry the President of the United States. There's 4 security guards and 2 outriders. If they'd have been there, of course, Kennedy could not have been killed by a bullet from outside because he was so well protected. But the whole thing was removed, the security, to allow it to happen. And it was the same in Paris on that night. This is the back entrance to the Ritz Hotel, where the car left because it was decided by Mohammed Al-Fayed on the phone to his son Dodi from England that although she'd had a certain level of security all day, a Mercedes and a backup car, a Range Rover, that was suddenly at the crucial time going to be removed, and another Mercedes was brought in with no backup car and no security, apart from the Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard in the front seat. So suddenly, classic assassination, security is removed to allow it to happen. In the car that was driven away was this guy, Henri Paul, who's been the fall guy for it, or blamed on him. He is an asset, or was an asset, of British and French intelligence, had been for a long time, and he had 4 bank accounts which had considerable amounts of money paid in the period leading up to that, not necessarily for what happened to Diana, but because he was an asset of British and French intelligence, which is the same organization. And to really appreciate how this could be done, you need to appreciate something called trauma-based mind control. During the last war in the concentration camps of Germany, in fact, way back this has been known about, but particularly during the last war, they started to perfect the manipulation of a natural mechanism in the mind that shuts out trauma. What they did was to understand that if you could systematically traumatize someone, their mind would shut out the memory of it and create an amnesic barrier, which would be disconnected from the rest of the mind. This is what happens when people have a major road accident and they can't remember what happened. It's because the amnesic barrier has been created to shut out trauma, so we don't keep reliving the horror. Good thing. But they realized that if you could do that systematically and start with children, particularly before the age of 5 and 6, you could turn their minds into a honeycomb of self-contained compartments, none of which was aware of the other's existence. This guy was what they call a multiple, Henri Paul, which in their mind is broken up into different compartments, and so through trigger words and what have you, and trigger sentences, hypnotic keys, one amnesic barrier becomes the conscious level. That experiences something or is programmed to do something, and then he's pushed back and another one's pulled forward. It's actually got to the point where, amazing as it may seem, you can be drunk in one compartment and completely sober in the other, which is interesting in relation to what happened if you look at the story of Henri Paul. Once the programming is in there, and in the biggest secret, I put incredible documentation and background to this and what happened, and trauma-based mind control and how it creates assassins and people going crazy with guns to justify taking guns out of circulation, all this stuff. When you look at the background, all that is necessary is to program the guy, push that programming back into the mind, and that will stay there at the subconscious level until some trigger comes in. When that trigger word or trigger action or whatever is said or done, that programming is activated. So you can be in normal mode and be very normal and no problem and nothing, oh, I've never noticed anything different about old Henry that night. Trigger word, bang, programming, you're like a robot. And what gives away this is the fact that the car hit the 13th pillar. If you read The Biggest Secret, you'll see the incredible obsession with symbolism that this brother